Welcome back to homastudio's Python for Beginners series, and we've been focusing on functions, and the last one we focused on a return value. In this video we'll focus on parameters and arguments. Continuing where we left off in our last video, where we used a return value to take a variable and hold a value and actually use that value for the output, we created a variable that represented the function call and then use that, and it basically output the value. What we're going to do now is use something called parameters and arguments. You've probably heard those terms. Sometimes they're thought of as interchangeable, but they're really not. The values that you put in here are basically temporary variables that you can use with the function that a function is waiting for. And they're called the parameters. And when you call the function, you send the same amount as arguments. So you'll set parameters and then you'll pass arguments when you call the function. What we're going to do is we're going to set up arguments. So we're not going to use the input that we're using here. Even though that was very helpful, we're going to take this out and we'll show you how you could do this with arguments and parameters. So we're going to take that out. We'll keep in these variables that we're using here, and obviously this is coming up red because we just lost those variables. We're going to put in temporary variables, which are our parameters, and just to make it easier, I'll just put pp, comma, ep. Because I actually want to put in the possible points first and then the earned points, because that's how we did it with the input. And then here we could just replace this. Now it doesn't matter what order, just because it's going pp and ep here, we can still put ep because that's the way it gets divided, and we'll put pp. So that works fine. Now the only difference between what we did last time is that when you call the function, now if I called it right now, if I stop this and I tried to run the function, it's going to say missing 2 required positional arguments. See, we didn't put any arguments in here. And if 2 parameters are set, it's going to be looking for 2 arguments in the function call. So what I'm going to do here is send along arguments. So this is where we can actually put the value. The technical term is called formal parameters that go in here rather than arguments, but that just means it's the actual data that's getting passed. So we're going to pass the arguments, set parameters, pass arguments. So we're going to put in, let's put in 30, comma 20, and when the function gets called, it's going to use these 30 and 20, and it's going to say, okay, the earned points is 20, this is 30. It's going to do the math with those values, so they have to line up. There's the first parameter, there's the first argument, there's the second parameter, there's the second argument. They have to have the same number, and then it's actually doing math with those. It's still returning score, and then whatever value is returned is still going to get run. And I'll just call this, instead of CPI, I'll call this CPA for arguments. And I'll even change this. I'll just change this function name too. Since we're using arguments, we're not using input anymore. So the function name that's being defined is now args. Here's the function call, it's using args, and we're going to use this little variable here, CPA, to represent the function call. But now we're using arguments in here. Now I have to change this one too, the CPA. And the same thing should happen when we run it. So we're going to run it, except we're not going to input anything. The input is being done right here in the function call. And all we get is just the output. Your score is 66.7 because we don't have any input. So that's the way arguments work. They actually are temporary variables. Instead of using variables that got input from our shell, we actually are sending those values along as arguments and passing them when the function gets called. So that's the way arguments work. We're going to do a lot more with them, but this is a simple way to do that. And the next thing we'll do is we'll even set up our print statement as a function. So we could even, instead of just keeping our print statement down here, we could even create a print function. Now to create a print function, what we'll do is we'll just go here and create a separate function and make a function definition. I'll put it after the first one, and I'll just say def, and I'll just call it print score. And I won't put any parameters in here for now, and I'll put my colon, and then I'll just cut this and I'll put it in here, and I have to tab that over or indent it, and I'll move my function call down, and now we have a function that's printing out from the first function. So we're still going to need a function call to actually print out this one. So we could just go down here and say print score. we should be able to just do that, and it should be able to pull that because it's defining a function. I'm not seeing any red lines yet, but it should call the function here with the arguments as a variable, and then when it goes to print score, it should use this. It'll be able to use that CPA in there, and let's see if that works okay. And it does. It works fine. So it's able to actually call both the first function as a variable with arguments that are being passed, and then we're actually just using print score here to output that print statement. And it's still pulling in that value. Remember, this is still, so this function is actually being called inside the print function because the function's already being run, it's already returning a value, and this is the value that's being output right here. So whatever's returned from that first function is being put here from that original CPA variable that's here. So that's taking one step further and kind of creating a print function here just to do that. And there's more we could do with that, but let's stop here and then we'll keep moving on with this little series of function introductions.